My sister-in-law constantly goes on expensive vacations and drives luxurious cars but won't stop crying to my wife that they have no food. I've had enough and took all the groceries my wife gave them. My wife has a younger sister with 4 kids. My sister-in-law is a married som whose husband works 35 hours per week. Money is tight for them, but they still go on annual vacations, drive newer cars, etc. My wife and I keep separate finances except for a joint credit card and household bill. I also do most of the grocery shopping. This is relevant for later. A couple of years ago, I found out my wife had been buying groceries for my sister-in-law on our joint card. About $150, $200 per month for a few months. She said that her sister had come to her saying they were tight on money and that she needed help feeding their kids. This was about a month after they returned from their most recent vacation in Mexico. I told my wife in no uncertain terms that I was not supporting their family. She argued with me, saying that we could more than afford it. I replied that I didn't care if she wanted to help them, but that's her business. My wife stopped buying them groceries on our joint card after, but I'm sure she told her sister because sister-in-law has been standoffish since. In the last few months, grocery costs have been increasing due to inflation. As a cost-saving measure, I bought a whole cow for about $4,000, which works out to about $9 per pound and will last us more than a year, and my wife and I split the cost. Yesterday, I went to the freezer to pull some steaks and saw that the amount of beef was visibly lower. I checked our security cameras and saw my wife leaving the house with a big box. I texted her demanding to know if she had taken a bunch of our meat to sister-in-law, and she replied yes. I drove to their house and knocked on her door. When sister-in-law answered, I told her I was returning what my wife had brought over. Sister-in-law protested, saying I was taking food from her kid's mouth, but I said I didn't care. She already had one roast in the oven. I went to their freezer, and they had about 40 to 50 pounds of ground beef, steaks, and roasts from our cow, including a couple of prime rib roasts. I grabbed it all except the roast in the oven and drove home. My wife yelled at me, saying she couldn't believe how selfish I was and that sister-in-law called her crying. She also said she paid half of it to do whatever she liked. I yelled back, saying you don't get to decide to give away anything we pay for together, and said she acted like a sneak thief for doing it behind my back. My wife is still angry at me and says she won't speak to me until I apologize to her sister, return the meat that I took back, and apologize for calling her a thief. Update: I apologized to my wife for calling her a thief and that I would apologize to her sister for going to her house in a huff and upsetting her, but I said I wouldn't apologize for taking back the meat we paid for jointly. I laid it all out and said my position on me not buying groceries for their family hadn't changed. I said her husband only works 3 days a week, 12-hour shifts, and if they're struggling for food, he needs to pick up more shifts. I also said taking vacations and having new cars is a luxury they can't afford if I have to pitch in to pay for their food. As some of you suggested, I asked my wife why you aren't buying groceries with your money if you want to support them. My wife responded that she'd been buying them groceries for the past couple of years with her own money because they were up to their eyeballs in loans and credit card debt, but inflation means their groceries have cost her more and more. She then admitted to putting some things on our joint credit card in the last few months in smaller amounts than 2 years ago so that I wouldn't notice. As for the beef, sister-in-law called her this past weekend, crying, saying they needed help with food at the end of the month because one of the kids broke their iPad, which they used to keep the kids entertained, so they replaced it. She didn't ask me about taking them beef because she knew I would say no if she told me about the iPad and didn't think I would notice since we have so much meat. She said I have no idea how hard it is to raise 4 kids, and they need the iPad. I told her we needed to see a counselor because we're on different planets if she thinks an iPad is necessary. So yeah, we're going to do therapy. Until then, I'm sleeping in the basement.